mentioned a few weeks ago that now we're in ordinary time. The gospel and the first reading really don't have a lot to do with each other, but today is one of those small exceptions. Jesus asked the disciples, "Don't you have faith?" And in the very beginning of our first reading, we have a definition of faith. It's the realization of what is hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. Our example of faith is Abraham. Now, Abraham was a semi-nomadic shepherd, probably living somewhere in Iraq, either Iraq or southern Turkey. We're not sure which. And he received a call from the Lord to leave his homeland and go to a new place. And because of faith, he trusted. So we're going to return to that, the idea of leaving that which is comfortable. That's a prerequisite of faith. We hear that Abraham was a man of great faith. But yet if you read the story carefully, once in a while, he finagled a bit. For example, twice he was in a foreign land and he was worried that he'd get killed so that the king could take his wife Sarah. So instead of saying, "This was my wife," he said, "Oh, this is my sister or half-sister." So he's sort of hedging his bets. Remember how he hedged his bet with Hagar also. He's not having a kid, so he sleeps with a slave woman, and they have a kid, and Sarah will adopt that child. So sometimes Abraham's faith, he trusts in God, but not that much. I think all of us have felt like that. Remember the man who has an epileptic son, and Jesus says, "Do you have faith?" He says, "Yes, Lord, I have faith. Help what little faith I have." So giving to God with one hand, pulling back with the other. But Abraham proves himself to be a true man of faith in that final test. "Take your son, Isaac, the one you love, and sacrifice him to me." Now, we know the end of the story. Abraham didn't. As far as Abraham was concerned, that child whom he loved, and we know he loved him, because on the way up the mountain, do you ever notice Abraham carries the knife and the fire? The two things a child might hurt himself with. He wants to protect the child, even as he's leading him up to sacrifice. This is also the fulfillment of the promise God made. And now the whole promise is in doubt. But yet Abraham trusts. That is faith. Now, what does faith mean? Ultimately, faith is not believing in a certain set of dogmas. Faith is trusting. And that's a difficult thing to do in our world. There's a lot of reasons that we don't trust. A lot of people have hurt us. A lot of people have lied to us. When you get a Christmas card from someone who didn't send a Christmas card for 3 years running, and they send you an expensive Christmas card, what's your first thought? What does she want? When you're driving, do you trust the other drivers? Do you trust that the strawberries you buy in the grocery store will all be good? We try to shake the box a little because we know the ones on the lower layer are not as good as the top layer. And those phone calls you get from the insurance agents and from telemarketers, you trust what they say, don't you? By the way, if you trust in all those occasions, I'm a Nigerian prince, and with a lot of things going on in the world, we find it difficult to trust. Abraham trusted. So much so, he left his homeland, that which was comfortable and familiar, to travel to a land he didn't know. This is a good example of conversion, leaving that which is comfortable and familiar and traveling out into that desert, sort of like the Israelites did after they left Egypt. What's comfortable and familiar? For a lot of us, it's the same old sins we've been committing for the past 30 years. Every time we go to confession, we might as well say, "Father, it's the same old thing." Numbers have changed a bit, but it's the same old stuff. It's almost like our familiar sins are like that couch in the basement where we go down to watch the sports events. There's a spring coming out of it, it's all worn out, but we've broken it in, and we don't want to get rid of it. It's time to go downstairs and throw that couch out. It's time to leave what is familiar and go out into the unknown of getting rid of those silly supports that we put in our life. They really don't bring us life. They just cover over things for a few minutes. Second lesson from Abraham. He trusts in God, but not always. Faith is not an easy thing where it's 100% right from the start. Faith is something we try to give, but there are times where our faith will wear a bit thin. And sometimes faith, the greatest faith we can express is saying, God, I wish I had faith. I wish I could trust more in this circumstance. I've mentioned it before that I lost my brother from cancer in 2006. And when my parents were driving down to visit his grave on his birthday, they died in a car accident. For the next few weeks, my prayer was, God, I want to trust in you, but I can't. Give me that trust again. And so the question of how much faith we should have as much as we have, as much as we can have. And realize not everybody has gotten the same gift of faith. Some of us have never had a doubt in our lives. Others, well, I use the example, you say good morning to someone and she responds, prove it. Some of us, we're more analytic, we need proofs. Faith is doing the best you can. But it's a two-person activity. God has to give us faith. We have to respond. We have to embrace faith. Because without God, we just can't do it. But even with that grace, we've got to do our part. And then finally, sacrifice your son, your only son, Isaac, the one you love. I mentioned one of those moments in my life when faith was very difficult. Almost all of us will have one of those moments, or more. It's when we hit the wall. We hit the wall and we can't go back. We can't go to the right or left. We have a choice at that moment. Either we trust or we become angry, anxious people. The choice is ours. The fact that we hit the wall is not a sign that we've made a mistake. Maybe it's just God saying, I trust you enough to entrust you with this test. Because if you say yes now, your yes will be the most profound yes you've ever said in your life. Now, one last thing about Abraham. Why did God ask Abraham to sacrifice his son? And remember how Abraham was God's friend? Well, don't we share our suffering with our friends? Abraham loved God so much that he shared the suffering of losing an only child with Abraham. Maybe sometimes our sufferings, they're not punishments, but they're opportunities to say, God, I'll embrace this suffering as much as I can and offer it up for the pain of Joe, for the pain of Mary, to lighten their burden just a little bit. And all of a sudden that test, that suffering, we don't look at it as negative anymore. We look at it as an opportunity to love in a way that we didn't think was possible.